All right, Flathead Valley, welcome to our Patriots Day Pro Second Amendment rally. If you're glad you're here, clap your hands. If you're glad you live in the Flathead Valley, clap your hands. Before we get into our program, I want to do a little bit of a explaining of a situation that arose relative to our meeting here this evening. And when I get done, I think you're going to all be excited to hear the end of the story and not just the beginning. We knew when we started planning, and you folks that are standing around here, this is going to be about a 2-hour rally. In fact, the people at Liberty Fellowship would tell you that I preach for 2 hours on a given Sunday. So we got like 8 speakers here, and we would sure welcome you to come on down. We still got empty chairs here that are available, and we'd welcome you to do that. When we first started planning this, we knew we wanted to have it on Patriots Day, which is April 19. This is the 243rd anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, where Pastor Jonas Clark and his congregants at the Church of Lexington stood on Lexington Green, which was really in the front yard of their church, and resisted the British troops that were marching to Concord for the purpose of confiscating the firearms that were cached in Concord. You know the story. The British opened fire. 8 of the colonists were killed immediately. The colonists took cover and fired back, and that was the shot heard round the world. They went on to Concord Bridge. The colonists amassed in great numbers, confronted the British Army, defeated them at the bridge. They marched back to Boston, and our war for independence was on. Most Americans don't realize that there were 2 things about that we need to know and have been lost to history. Number one, the thing that triggered our war for independence was the attempted confiscation of firearms in that community. That was the thing that triggered our war for independence. And I would venture a guess and say that should a government decide to confiscate the guns of the American people again, it would be a second American Revolution. The other thing that's lost to history is the fact that the Minutemen on Lexington Green were mostly the congregants of Jonas Clark's Church of Lexington. It was that patriot pastor and that congregation of men that stood in front of the British Army that day and fired the shot heard round the world. So we wanted to have the rally on the same day as this event on the 19th, which of course is today. So that mandated that we had to have an evening event. Most people work during the day, whereas on Saturday they can come at a noon rally or something. By the way, the young man, Braxton, I believe is his name, from Columbia Falls, who is one of several Columbia Falls students that refused to participate in the anti-gun walkout, and he and many of his other classmates, they decided that they would have their own protest in favor of the Second Amendment, and his classmates stood together, and there were more classmates at Columbia Falls for the Second Amendment than there were against the Second Amendment. And Braxton had a rally at Depot Park this past Saturday, right? And there was a lot of people there. How many of you were there at that rally? Several of you were there at that rally. Braxton, would you stand up and wave at everybody? Give Braxton a great hand. So we wanted to have it in the evening, so that demanded that we have an indoor facility with lights as it began to get dark, and we didn't know what the weather would be. Fortunately, it's a beautiful day, but we had no way of knowing about that. So we had to get an indoor venue. There are not a whole lot of options available for this kind of an event in our area for an evening that could accommodate this crowd and have this kind of a setup where we could have tables for the candidates and so forth that are here and accommodate our crew with the video and the audio and all the things that we need at the stage. And so this was the ideal place for us. So whenever we talked to the management of the fairgrounds, we were told that it was county ordinance or county law or whatever they call it that prohibited the bringing of firearms into this building. Whenever I heard that, I didn't like that. First of all, this building is not owned by a private individual. This building is owned by the people of Flathead County. This is one of the most patriotic, pro-Second Amendment, pro-Constitution counties in the entire United States of America. And we're going to have a pro-Second Amendment Patriots Day rally, and we're told that we can't bring firearms. That's stuck right here. But at the same time, we are law-abiding people. And for those of you that are in the media that are here looking for an opportunity to find something to criticize with Chuck Baldwin or with this rally, I think what we have done should show you that we are not anarchists. We are law-abiding people, and even when we don't like a law, we will abide by that law as long as we are able to do so without violating fundamental rights on a long-term basis. And so we said, okay, we don't like that, but we will abide by it if that's the law. So we put in all of our advertising, and if you saw our ads, if you heard our ads or anything, you saw that little disclaimer at the bottom: the firearms were prohibited in this building. Well, what I'm about to tell you I think is an act of God, but say it as you want. I was constrained in my heart to call a man and invite him to dinner. And that man is the former undersheriff of Flathead Sheriff's Department, Jordan White. Jordan, where are you? Okay, front and center, I couldn't see you. So I had dinner with him. And as we were talking about a lot of things, I handed him one of our flyers. And he saw the flyer and he saw the little thing at the bottom and he said, "Whoa, where did that come from? That you can't bring guns in this building. Where did that come from?" And I said, "Well, that's what we were told by the management of the fair." And he said, "Well, that's not right." He said, "I've been undersheriff. I've been in the force a long time. I think I know the law." He said, "Let me do some digging on this. Let me check this out." And on his own, I mean, I didn't ask him to do this. I didn't even know that he would notice it or make any comment about it one way or the other. As far as I was concerned, it was just accepted thing. That's the way it was. He said, "Well, let me check on this." So he did. And he went to the sheriff, and he went to KPD, and he went to the county attorney's office. And lo and behold, all three of those agencies of government in this county agree. And I talked to these two police officers back here just a moment ago when they first came in, and they said that they agree that this building is not off limits to firearms, and we are free to bring our firearms in this building. So I want Jordan to come and just say a couple of words. Would you come to the platform and say a couple of things? And I want you to give this guy, I'll tell you what, this guy showed me something. Not only did he notice that our rights were being violated by this supposed law or ordinance, which wasn't true, but was assumed to be true because people were saying it. And I'm sure there are many of you assumed that that was true. You've been told that many times before tonight. Not only did he recognize that this wasn't true, but he decided on his own volition to actually get involved for the people of this county and for the Constitution of the United States, and specifically for our Second Amendment liberties under the Constitution. And he went to the top and he got it settled across the board, countywide, regarding our rights as Flathead Valley residents and as American citizens. And I got to tell you, I love this guy, and I want him to say a few words, and thank you very much. Give Jordan a good hand.
Thank you all. I certainly didn't plan for this, and I'm just a lot humbled to even be recognized. I'd like to say all that my involvement in this whole thing was what anybody in the same situation would do. But I guess we know that that's not really true. Maybe they wouldn't know how, and as we talked earlier, perhaps would feel that somebody else should do that. And I've spent a career. I'm proud to be a candidate for Flathead County Sheriff this year. I appreciate this opportunity to even share with you a little bit about my heart. But what I do love is I love local government, and I love Flathead Valley. I love Montana, and above all, I love our Constitution, because we know where we stand. I've been sharing, I've had an amazing life as I've grown up, and I was taught early on to love God, guns, and freedom, in that order. But what I've learned as I've campaigned and I've shared with people, my initial vision for my campaign and my contract with you should I be elected is connecting the needs of the people with the heart of the community. And it sounds like a little cliche until you realize that you are the hearts of the community. Our fathers, our mothers, our teachers, our students, our leaders, our followers, our soldiers, our protectors, our doctors. That's the heart of the community, and may we never forget it. And as we come here to celebrate Patriots Day, I have goosebumps, because if you've ever Googled Patriot, somewhere along the line it became a word that had some political or negative or aggressive connotations, but the Latin root word for patriot is pater or petar, which is father. And I think any one of us can recognize, if not in our own fathers, which I can for myself, but in a father that you know what you would do for your children, what you would do for your family, and what you would do for your country. When I think of what my father and the fathers in my life would do for me, for you, for our country, for our freedom, for our community, and have done, I am proud to be a patriot. I'm proud to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity. I still hold to believe that us working together is what makes local government work. I say two things matter: experience and results. When I say experience, yes, I've had an amazing career up to and including the position of undersheriff. I have not waited for permission to make differences in our community anywhere that I saw an opportunity, and I'm proud of that. But more importantly than that, I built relationships and relationships and relationships all across the state and the country. That's what makes things happen, is our relationships with one another, our connection and our respect, and the ability to reach out and touch each other in a meaningful way. And when you say, I need help, people listen. Results, because they're often harsh and always fair. Tonight's result makes people feel good, makes us feel free, makes us feel heard, and I'm proud of that. But we must produce results every day, and if local government doesn't produce results for us and we don't feel that we're being represented, then we begin to experience a wedge that's driven between us and them, and may we never feel or experience the isolation that begins to creep into our lives. So I appreciate you all being here today. You being here, you being connected and being present and standing for what you believe is what keeps that from occurring. We stay on the same page, we stay connected, and I know, I promise, and as he well knows, he has access to me, you have access to me. And it's not because I just decided to be sheriff. There's many of you in this room that have met with me in my office, met with me in a restaurant. We had nothing in common when we sat down together, but we had a lot in common when we left. That's what I find over and over again, and you'll find that here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity and the honor.
I think he was being very modest. I want to tell you what I believe is the truth. There are a lot of people in political office, and there are a lot of people that are not in political office, but they talk about politics and they talk about the problems that we face, etc. Anybody can talk about it. It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to do something about it. Whenever we sat down for dinner a couple of days ago and we had this conversation, he could have very easily seen that flyer and saw what that said at the bottom, and knowing that it was not right, but he could have just brushed it off and, you know, said something like, oh, you know, that's too bad, or whatever, and pretend kind of sympathy, knowing that it was not the law, knowing that we were being misled, knowing that we were coming into a situation where that we were being asked to disarm ourselves in violation of the Constitution and our county laws, and yet just letting it go, because otherwise maybe he's going to be in a controversial position or whatever. I don't know how that happened. But all I know is that when he saw it and became aware of it, he didn't just, oh, I'm so sorry about that. He actually took action, got something done, and now we all know that the laws of this county do not prohibit us from bringing arms into this building, and we can have a pro-Second Amendment rally here tonight with good conscience and good faith to know that in this county we are free to keep and bear arms. So Jordan, I have a great deal of respect for what you did. And I just thank you so much for your willingness to put yourself in the middle of the truth and in the middle of what was right. And I hope that you'll get to know this guy after we get done here. We've got something besides just, you know, clapping and rah-rah and all that. We want this evening to be a very informative and educational night. Here's why we think this rally was so important and so needed right now. I don't think there's any question, and you know this is true, Governor Bullock is going to introduce several egregious gun control measures in the legislature next session. He's already told us that. I'm not saying anything that he hasn't even said publicly. There are going to be several gun control measures that he's going to introduce, and others, in our legislature in Helena next session. That makes it absolutely essential to we here in this county and all the counties, but we're responsible for Flathead County. It is essential that we elect men and women that will go to Helena and will not compromise our Second Amendment. So this has purpose. We're going to introduce you to some candidates, and there's other candidates here, and we want to recognize all of you candidates that are here before the evening is over. But we are going to introduce you to some candidates who are running in opposition to incumbents, both Republican and Democrat, who voted against a bill that was introduced in 2017, HB 385. That bill would have authorized school personnel in our Montana schools, teachers, etc., to carry concealed weapons in the schools. You and I both know that the most dangerous place in America to be is in a gun-free zone. That's the most dangerous place to be. We know that guns protect life. And that in our schools, our most vulnerable, our young people are most vulnerable in our schools today because, for the most part, they are unprotected by a firearm. There is not some responsible adult in the room that is capable and able to protect them in that kind of environment because of the laws that prohibit them from being armed in those facilities. So therefore, we are looking for 2019 legislature, and we are seeing gun control coming down the pike. Let me give you a heads up. What's going to be happening is these, what they call red flag laws. That's going to be the thing that they're going to promote. It's backdoor gun control. I hate to tell you, I mean, I am apolitical. You know, some people accuse Chuck Baldwin of being a political preacher. I'm about as apolitical as you can get. I don't care whether it's Republican or Democrat, white or black, rich or poor, north or south, east or west. Right is right, wrong is wrong, and I'm going to, with the help of God, I'm going to stand for what's right no matter what the cost. So I don't care whether the president is Republican or Democrat. And when Donald Trump said in that meeting with members of Congress that we should seize guns first and then worry about due process later, that was one of the most stupid, unconstitutional things any president has ever said in American history. You cannot seize guns first and worry about due process later, because if you've seized guns first, there is no due process. So people say, well, he didn't really mean it. Well, he shouldn't have said it if he didn't mean it. But even if he didn't mean it, here's the problem. There are people all around the country that took him seriously. I lived in the state of Florida for 35 years. I was very involved in that state, and I know the mechanics of that state. I know the people. I know the makeup. I know the politics of that state. I was shocked when I learned that a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican governor in Florida passed one of the most egregious gun control laws ever passed in U.S. history. They banned firearms from everyone under the age of 21. 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are now banned from purchasing or owning any firearm, a .22 rifle, for example, in the state of Florida. They also enacted these red flag laws. And what the red flag laws do in Seattle, Washington, just was another example of this. Illinois is another example. There's 8 states around the country that have already passed the red flag laws. The red flag laws say this: if a person is suspected of being mentally ill, suspected, not adjudicated, not due process making a determination. If a person is suspected of being mentally ill, never committed a crime, never threatened anyone to commit a crime, and never committed an act of violence, has done absolutely nothing wrong, no crime, no criminal activity, nothing, but somebody, maybe a family member or maybe a neighbor or who knows who, said, I think this person might be crazy, the authorities are able, under the red flag laws, to come to that individual and by force confiscate his guns without trial, without a charge of crime or criminal activity. On the basis of suspicion, the guns are confiscated from that individual. Ever since Florida passed their red flag law about a month ago, every week since that law passed, they have confiscated the guns of an individual in that state. A person who was never charged with a crime, never committed a crime, never threatened a crime, but somebody said they might be crazy. Well, I'm going to tell you what. If you ask me, I think that all those bozos in Washington, D.C. are more crazy than the craziest person walking around on Kalispell, Montana. Let's remove all of the guns that are protecting them everywhere they go. This is a egregiously unconstitutional, unfair, immoral bill that is going to be proposed. I guarantee you it's going to be on the table in 2019 right here in Montana. And they sell it, well, nobody wants to have a crazy person with a gun, and they sell it under this rubric of mental illness. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, due process, the due process of the United States laws and Constitution apply to every person in this country, no exceptions. There are laws already on the books in Montana that deal with this issue. And this is something that I am warning you is going to happen, and it's something that we need to be on guard with, and it's something that we need to be sure that our legislatures understand. When you talk to the legislators between now and election time, be sure you bring this up to them, help them understand this issue. A lot of people don't get it, and they're going to go along with it thinking that they're protecting the state or the county, and they're not doing any sort. Seth Bergley is from Joliet, Montana. He is the man that introduced this bill, HB 385, in 2017, that would have lawfully armed our teachers in the schools of Montana. We've invited him to come. He's here tonight. I want him to come and talk about this bill. Would you welcome, please, Seth Bergley?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a honor and a pleasure to be here. It's always great to be in a room with a bunch of people that love guns. So, I guess to start this out, I want to read a quote from a Frenchman, which might seem weird, but I think you'll agree with me that it makes sense. He said, and 150 years ago, when he was battling socialism in his country and the move towards socialism, he was looking to America. And he said, "Life, faculties, production. In other words, individuality, liberty, and property. This is man. And in spite of the cunning of artful political leaders, these three gifts from God precede all human legislation and are superior to it. Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place." As a legislator, and I've seen several legislators in this room, this is the Constitution. This is the basis for the Constitution, is property rights and individual liberty. So moving forward, I introduced a bill last session that would have allowed school officials to carry a concealed firearm. There were requirements for training in the bill, and it would have, everybody calls it the teacher carry bill, but the reality is, when I'm looking at a school situation, there's really two types of people that I think will carry guns, or that I think should carry guns, or could carry guns, possibly. There's the type of people that are very well trained, and that if a shooter was to come into a room, they would know how to respond. They would have a basic understanding of where they need to go, what they need to do. But then there's also going to be people, and you can look at the recent shooting in Florida at the coach who stood at a choke point and basically just took bullets that were meant for kids because he had no other options. There's going to be people like that who don't need to understand tactics. They don't really even need to understand how to shoot all that well. All they have to do is have a gun in their hand. And I think we lose in the debate, we lose the idea of all it takes is a guy with a gun, and that's a formidable offense. So in moving forward, there were 13, I believe, and I can look up the numbers. The bill failed 43 to 57, and we have a 59 majority. So there were a number of Republicans that voted against the bill for various reasons. I believe you have somebody coming up to speak later who is actually running against one of those people, so I'm sure he can bring that up to you. And I think the main point in moving forward is that in this national debate, I've had several people talk to me and they said, the NRA is not the strength of the gun community. The NRA is a champion for guns, but they're an organization that really doesn't have boots on the ground. It's the people in the streets who reach out to their family members, and they reach out to their friends that may or may not shoot that much, and they win them over in the coffee shops, and they win them over at the restaurants, and they say, hey, look, I'm a gun owner, this is what I look like, this is why it's important. So, talking about being active, there's a lot of people that are running for office, there's a lot of people that are, getting involved in sheriffs, there's a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, that are public servants, but what I would like to see is I would like to see the gun community as a whole stand up and reach out to people. Find a kid that might want to go hunting. Reach out to your neighbors that don't really have guns and invite them to go shooting. Because that's how we're going to win this in the end. We're going to win it by reaching out, by changing our communities, because it's going to be a bottom-up movement. Another thing I'd like to say about the possible gun laws that the governor will be proposing, assuming that we maintain the majority and that most of the people that served on judiciary, of which I was one, I was fortunate to be the vice chair, and I can guarantee you that any bill that comes from the governor's office that will curtail anything to do with firearms will not make it out of that committee. So. St. George Tucker, who was one of the commentaries for the Blackstone's laws in England in the early 1800s, which is one of the basis for our law system in this country, wrote, "This may be considered the true palladium of liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest limits possible. Wherever standing armies are kept up, and the right of the people to bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction." And I think that's what we're seeing in our country today. It's the slow movement towards, we only want to limit, we want slight gun registration, but they don't even know what guns are. Their idea of what they want to limit has no bearing on anything that actually exists. So I'm very hesitant to agree with them on anything. In closing, I would like to end with a quote from one of the true patriots in this country, Patrick Henry, who I like to think had a flair for the dramatic and wasn't afraid to charge forward in just about any situation, said, "Are we at last brought to such humiliating and debasing degradation that we cannot be trusted with the arms for our defense? Where is the difference between having our arms in possession and under our direction and having them under the management of Congress? If our defense be the real object of having these arms, in whose hands can they be trusted with more proprietary or equal safety to us as in our own hands?" Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Seth, very much, and thank you for the work you're doing. And it's going to be not, we got to get out of this box and stop looking at things as a left-right, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, and we got to start looking at it. You're either a constitutionalist or you're a tyrannist. You're either a constitutionalist or you're a tyrannist. And we got to support people that are going to stand for the Constitution regardless of party label. The next speaker that I want to introduce to you is well known to you. He has served 6 terms in the legislature here. And by the way, each one of these next 3 speakers, as Seth just told us, each one of these next 3 speakers are running against an incumbent who voted against Seth's bill. Okay? That's why they're on the platform tonight. Because they are running against an incumbent, Democrat or Republican, who voted against this bill. This candidate's opponent is the incumbent Democrat Zach Perry, who voted against HB 385. And so we want to elect this candidate that I'm about to introduce, actually somebody else is coming to introduce him. Jerry O'Neill is the candidate I'm talking about, and Leonard Falk is going to come and introduce you, Jerry. So Leonard, would you come and introduce your friend Jerry O'Neill to us? Let's give Leonard a good hand as he comes to make the introduction.
You know, our next speaker is a man of, besides being a personal friend of mine, he's also a man of great integrity, a man who is a very deep thinker, and a man who is a very thorough legislator. If you go to, Jerry's website isn't quite up, jerryo'neill.com, but we're going to have a video on there that explains a situation that I thought just epitomized Jerry's ability as a legislator. And what happened, we have this scenario where the House is ready to vote on a bill that went through the Senate with flying colors. They expected it to pass unanimously in the House, and Jerry stands up and he says, wait a minute. There's some language in this bill that says it's going to be a negative impact on some of my constituents in my district. And as a result of that, the vote came out almost unanimously against the bill. It was sent back to the Senate, and they had to rewrite the bill to eliminate that language. And, you know, for me, you know, I'd love a senator or a representative that stands up for his constituents and actually does his job of reading the bill. And, you know, Jerry does that. Jerry works for the people. So let's give Jerry a warm hand. Next legislator from House District 3, Jerry O'Neill.
Thank you, Leonard. One of the things I did lately that I'm proud of is I gave a guy a ride down to Helena. He's sitting right there, Braxton Shewalder, and he got up and spoke some at the Helena pro-gun rally, and then he gave an interview to the AP reporter, and she put a piece out and made it, I think it made every major newspaper in the United States. And this is, Braxton is famous now. I wish he would have did it before. I think he's too young to file for legislature. But next session, maybe I'll be glad to bow out and let him run. One of the things I want to speak about, kind of esoteric maybe, and maybe I think it's very important, is there's a 28th Amendment being proposed by quite a few people around the United States, with the object of the amendment, I don't know the object of what any of the results of the amendment would be, to take away our right to assemble. It would take away the NRA's right to assemble, to get together, take our money, and help campaign for us and lobby our legislatures. And in Citizens United, Democrats Fighting for Reform, they have a survey, and they request you to sign their Stop the NRA survey. One of the questions they have on their site is, did you know that End Citizens United is one of the largest groups in the country working to stop special interests like the NRA? I don't think people are awake to that. And it's serious. And it's what they want to stop the privileges of artificial entities shall be determined by the people through federal, state, or local law and shall not be construed to be inherent or inalienable. Okay, so the right for the NRA or the right for the ACLU or the right for Liberty Fellowship or any other group, for them to send out campaign flyers or to put up a billboard or help somebody with a TV ad, that can be determined by the local Kalispell City Council or the Whitefish City Council? I don't think so. And maybe you think I'm being a little bit too extremist or too chicken little or something. In total of nearly 200, as early as 2018, 19 states have formally enacted some form of a 28th Amendment resolution through citizens' ballot initiatives or by legislative action. 20 more states had resolutions pending in 2017. More than 800 cities and towns across the nation have passed 28th Amendment resolutions. These communities have acted regardless of whether they are in so-called red states or blue states. When they have been done so through the voice of the voters and ballot initiatives, the partisan support is overwhelming, with results of over 80% in favor of a common result. I think that's scary when they're going to use that amendment to take away our right to get together and support an issue or a campaign candidate. And I hope you take a look at it and support candidates that understand what's going on and tell your neighbor about it, because I think it's very serious. The state of North Dakota, to our east, they're trying to get an amendment on their ballot. The Forces of Darkness are trying to get an amendment on their ballot, which will make it that the commission, I think it's seven people, will be appointed by the governor, and that commission will say who can speak and who can't speak, and what they can speak on and what they can't speak on. Now, I think in China they have a block party that does that, or a block commissioner or a commissar, and I don't want that in Montana or the United States. So anyhow, maybe I'm swimming upstream, but I'm hoping we can stop that now, because it's got a lot of traction and it's going to take a lot to kill it. And that would be harder than killing the bill that Leonard was talking about. And I hope we can do it. Thank you.
Jerry has been a solid defender of the Second Amendment and the Constitution in general for no less than 6 terms, 4 sessions in the Senate, 2 in the House, and now he's in HD3 running against gun control, Zach Perry, and I trust that you folks will support Jerry. If you live in his district, and even if you don't, you can contribute to his campaign, or you can help him in other ways. I think most of the folks that are running for elected office have materials in the back, and you can sign up to help these folks, and I hope that you will. It's not enough to come to a rally once in a while and shout rah rah for the Second Amendment. We need to work, folks. We need to get off of our hind ends, and we need to work for people that are going to make a difference in our legislature and make a difference in our states. So please find a candidate you can support, and I'm hoping that the people that we're introducing you tonight will be one of those, or more than one, that you can support. Our next speaker is a Libertarian candidate who's running for House District 5 against Democrat Dave Fern. Dave Fern voted against HB 385. He's one of the votes that killed Seth's bill in the legislative session in 2017. Cindy is a solid pro-life, pro-Second Amendment Libertarian candidate. Dr. Annie Bukacek is going to come and make the introduction for her. Let me give her the mic. Just real quick, let me tell you a little bit about Annie first. Not only is she a co-sponsor of this event, the 3 co-sponsors are myself and Liberty Fellowship, Dr. Bukacek at Hosanna Healthcare, and Frontier Guns and Ammo, which is managed by Scott Hansen. Scott is in the back. Scott, stand up and wave it. And I'm going to have Scott come and say a word before we finish tonight. But not only is Dr. Annie one of the sponsors, this was her idea. She's really the one that came to me and said, we need to do this. And when Dr. Annie says we need to do it, we usually wind up doing it. I mean, that's just the way it goes. So Dr. Annie is going to introduce Cindy to us.
The instigator. So I met Cindy in 2011, and she was getting meetings together in support of Ron Paul. And she comes from Alaska and a long line of Republicans. She has a very political family. A lot of them were in office. And when she listened to Ron Paul speak, and she saw how the Republicans degraded him, put him down, that really upset her, and she started looking into it. She's just a very strong proponent of not just pro-life. She stands out at 40 Days for Life and prays for the unborn babies, but for liberty. And we have a lot of things in common. One of the things that we don't have in common, unlike, Cindy has patience and tolerance for listening to other people's viewpoints that don't make sense. And she's running in Whitefish, so this is perfect. So here's Cindy Dyson. She's awesome. Go get her.
Annie, you always amaze me. So much power in such a tiny package. I remember 6 years ago in winter walking my son to school, to the Whitefish Middle School. It was shortly after the Newtown shooting of 20 elementary school children. And I remember as I saw the middle school looming in front of us, just this growing sense of dread that became fear by the time I dropped his hand. I can't remember if he was still holding hands with me at 13. He held hands with me way longer than most of the kids, but maybe not at 13. I watched him go through the big glass doors in the front, and really actually had to fight back an urge to rush in and grab him and take him back home just for a few days, I guess. There was no rationality behind that except my fear. Later, as he got older, he's 19 now, he would do more and more going out with friends to plays in Whitefish. They'd go out to restaurants in Whitefish, many places where people gather. And I realized I didn't have that same sort of fear that morning I did after Newtown and sending him into school. And I thought part of that may be that we hold our certain places, schools, our churches, as a little more sacrosanct and have more trouble when the worst things happen in those places. But I also realized that part of it was that I trust my community some. I know that in any large gathering of people in Whitefish, in the Flathead, in most places in Montana, and where I'm from, Alaska, is where I'm from originally. I've been here 22 years. That I know in such gatherings that there are usually a few people who have chosen to carry a gun. A few people in any gathering who have taken on that responsibility for defending those around them if needed. I know this has always made me feel safer, and I recognized when I was thinking through this that I feel my son is safer. Knowing that there'll be a few people in a crowded theater or church or restaurant, almost anywhere we gather, there will be a few people who are armed, almost anywhere, except our schools, our gun-free zones, almost anywhere except our schools. I want to ask you guys a question. When you're in a public gathering, a place like this, or so many other places that we come together in large numbers, and you know that a few people around you, maybe a lot of people around you in some gatherings, are armed, are you more afraid, or are you less afraid? Less afraid. Yes, we are less afraid. We need less fear in our schools. We need less fear in our communities. Decisions made out of fear are often bad decisions, and fear brings out the worst in us. My name is Cindy Dyson. I am a rare thing, a libertarian woman running in Whitefish, House District 5. I want to say we have two other libertarian candidates here today, Sid Dowd and Sean Guyman. If you guys want to stand up. Yay, libertarians. I actually came to Libertarian thinking through a Republican, but a unique Republican, Ron Paul. So I know Sid, I don't know Sean well. I know Sid is a veteran and an ardent supporter of Second Amendment rights. I hope you will talk to him this evening. Anyway, I'm Libertarian running in Whitefish, and I am not afraid to stand up to any provisions that would threaten our foundational rights. I am not afraid to work to reclaim the fullness of those rights where they have already been eroded. I cannot be bullied, nor coaxed, nor shamed out of my deep conviction that our right to bear arms is foundational to our freedom, to living with less fear, and to saving lives. Do not forget that 260 million people are died in the 20th century at the hands of their own governments. Little children, babies, school children. Sometimes when it's a number that large, most of the time when it's a number that large, we actually are more distant from it. The images when I took my son to school that morning of the 20 dead school children, that's a lot easier to imagine than 260 million. So I want everyone to just really imagine 260 million people in the last century dead by their own government. This is what fear does when it's allowed to fester, to grow, and to erode our foundational rights. We become our worst natures, and millions die. I am running unopposed. I'm running with only unopposed. I wish I was running unopposed in my district. I am running with only one opponent in my district in Whitefish. He's a Democrat, a well-meaning, ethical man, I believe, but we have very different ideologies about how government's roles in our lives. I actually have a shot at winning. But I cannot without help. If you want me, you don't have to live in Whitefish, but especially if you live in Whitefish, please come talk to me. If you want me, I need your help to win. I need volunteers. I need donations. Beating back fear is neither easy nor cheap. Thank you.
Yeah, I would rather vote for a libertarian who is pro-life and pro-Second Amendment and pro-Constitution than to vote for a Democrat or a Republican who's going to compromise our constitutional liberties. I know what it's like to run a third-party campaign, except I jumped in the water at the national level and I ran for president of the United States in the Constitution Party, and I was happy to get the endorsement of Ron Paul of Texas and several other congressmen, by the way, that people would normally think that would endorse a third-party candidate. But I know how difficult it is to run any race, local or state or federal, as a third-party candidate. It's not easy. And in Whitefish, like she said, has only got one opponent in the general election, a Democrat who is one that voted against Seth's bill last year in 2017. And so wouldn't it be great if we could get a pro-life, pro-Second Amendment libertarian in Whitefish? Wouldn't that be great? Our third candidate that we want to introduce to you is also running against a man who voted against HB 385. This man is a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps. He is running against a Republican who has very strong connections in this community. He has a lot of backing among the establishment of our county, and he will not be an easy man to beat. But he is a man that has compromised the Second Amendment. He's compromised the will of the people here in Flathead Valley. He voted against 385. I'm talking about Frank Garner. And the man that I am introducing, or actually Colonel Coates is going to come and introduce him, is running against Frank in HD 7 as a Republican. So his election will be in the primary in the month of June, which is going to be very, very quickly upon us. Colonel Coates, would you come and please introduce Lieutenant Colonel Bob Welzo? All right, God bless you. Thank you.
So I'm a little bit of a fish out of water. I'm a foreigner here. I grew up in eastern Montana, and now I live in Gallatin Valley. So why did I drive 5 hours up here? Probably the same reason why you guys are here, for hope. That we have a hope that the country we live in today is not the country we're going to live in tomorrow. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I put my hope in the wrong things for most of my life. I put my hope in political parties, right? I think if we want real hope, we open the Bible and we look at Exodus 18:21. And let's look what God said. God said, find capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes, and put them in charge. And why is that important? Why is that important today? I'll tell you why. Benjamin Franklin said there were two things this country had to maintain freedom. One was private property ownership, and the other one was freedom of speech. Well, I'm going to tell you, this shirt I'm wearing, I own it. The government doesn't come by once a year and collect taxes on it, but they do on your property. Private property ownership's gone, okay? Second thing, freedom of speech. As soon as they legislated hate speech, we lost freedom of speech. You know, on universities in the United States today, some of them consider Jesus hate speech. Think about that. King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The God that came here, that died and rose again for us and for our freedom, somehow is hate. If that's hate, stand by for heavy rolls. If you look at these amendments, right? Fourth Amendment, we've lost our protection under the Fourth Amendment. And we've lost our protection under the Fifth Amendment because they're collecting all our data. And don't think for a minute they aren't here to take your guns, because that's exactly what they want to do. That's what every tyrant wants to do. Now, we can stand up here and blame politicians, because I've done that most of my life. And then one day I had to look in the mirror. It's not the politicians, it's you and me. You know what the failure is in the United States? It's the failure of men. It's the failure of men to stand up and be men. And let me point it out a little bit. What's the failure? We had tens of thousands of kids skip school to go support an immoral march, because it's immoral to take away a man's right to protect himself, his family, and his property. Men failed. Where were the fathers, where were the husbands saying, not in my family? As men, we failed to lead our families, we failed to lead in our communities, and we failed to lead in our nation. Second case, men failure, right? When the government says that I could wake up in the morning and feel like a woman and walk in a woman's restroom, where were the men that stood up and said, not on my watch? Where are the men in Montana stand up, not on my watch, when they want to do it in the high schools? And the third thing I'll just show, another failure of men. When tens of thousands of women hit the street in our nation's capital to protest immorality with mothers and daughters dressed up as genitalia. That's an oxymoron, folks. But where were the men saying, we're not doing that and we're not supporting it? What I'm telling you is men used to be the proud protectors and providers of the family. They used to be the leaders in our country. And I'm looking at all you men out there. It's time for us to stand up. And it's time for us to stand up in the voting booth. You know, no longer can we go in there and mark a block because it's our flavor. We need to know who we're voting for and why we're voting for them. And what I'm going to tell you is Bob is an American, number one. Number two, he meets the criteria. He's capable, he's honest, he fears God, and he hates bribe. And number three, he's already served his country as a United States Marine, and he's here to serve you. Welcome, Bob.
How's everybody doing out there? Hurrah! You know, Margaret Thatcher famously said that the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of everybody else's money. And you know, her comment isn't really a complete description of the problem with socialism, now is it? For instance, she never addresses how a country gets from freedom to socialism. And she also doesn't mention what happens after all the other money runs out. You see, the real problem with socialism is that it demands the supremacy of the government over the supremacy of the people. America is intended to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The people are supreme in our form of government. It's not like that in socialism. It's a system of the elite, by the people, and for the government. A system where the government is supreme in all things. Are we really ready to accept the transition from liberty to tyranny? You see, some might say, well, you know what, we've already become a socialist state. There are others that say, that's worse than that, we're communists now. I have to be honest with you, I probably would fall into the category that we're really suffering from crony capitalism. But it really doesn't matter what label we put on our current situation. We know that we have not yet become subjects of totalitarian tyranny. And of course, everybody here knows why, don't we? It's because we still have our guns. That's right. You see, the road from freedom to tyranny is always a violent one. Every would-be dictator knows, above all else, they must disarm the people. And we will never tolerate tyranny in America because we will never be disarmed. But we must take some advice of one of the most distinguished combat commanders in World War II. Never let the enemy choose the battlefield. George Patton knew a thing or two about battlefields, and he very soundly applied the principles taught to warriors by Sun Tzu for ages in the art of war. But we're seeing a battle rage in two principal theaters, in the judicial branch and in the executive branch. But isn't it stunning that we're seeing almost no one fighting on behalf of the people in the legislative branch, the government body that's supposed to be representing the people? You know, it's probably meaningless to try to figure out how our legislative bodies have become so useless, but it's critically meaningful for us to understand the tactical advantage that we can gain from recognizing it. You see, our legislative bodies in our country are almost universally despised. I think Congress had a 17% approval rating or something like that. And why is that? It's because they are filled with cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men who have subverted the power of the people and seized for themselves the reins of government. You see, that's what President George Washington predicted would happen in his farewell address. So I submit to you that the battlefield we can and should choose is in the legislatures of the states. We need to regain the people's houses from those unprincipled men who have stolen them from us. Why is it important? You see, the legislature, the legislative branch, is the one who has the power to impeach. Have you ever wondered why there's almost never a corrupt politician or an unjust judge who's impeached? I'm telling you, it's because they're unprincipled men controlling the reins of power, and they give them a pass. Well, I say, no more passes. It's time for normal citizens to take back control of our government. And the only meaningful way to do this is to run for and win a controlling percentages of the seats of the legislative bodies, and then to go on the offense against the corruption in the executive and judicial branches. You see, we think that we're here because of the threat against the Second Amendment. You know, I'm under Pastor Baldwin's teaching, so I know. Make no mistake, the Second Amendment existed as a natural law long before our Constitution was written, and it will exist long after it's gone. But as long as we have cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men controlling the reins of government, none of our natural laws are safe. We can't fight this defensively. We must go on the offense and strike them at the exact point that they are most vulnerable. You see, legislatures can write statutes, they can amend constitutions, they control the budget as well as impeach. Our founding fathers understood why the legislature must be controlled by the people. You see, another World War II general, General Douglas MacArthur, said that in war, there is no substitute for victory. Well, there's also no substitute for victory in the fight for liberty. Our guns and our Second Amendment rights are at risk because we have no warriors in our legislature. That means we must act. We must recruit principled men and women for the legislature and then elect them. There's no substitute. There's no second place. This is a fight for our lives. I was asked to run for House District 7. The man currently holding the seat is a Republican that voted for higher gas taxes. He's a Republican who voted for Obamacare. And he's a Republican who voted to kill the Montana School Safety Act that would have armed our teachers. Join me in defeating the political elite who've hijacked our government. My name is Robert Welzel. I am an American, and I will never surrender to tyranny. I am a United States Marine, and I will fight for right and freedom. And I am a Montanan, and I will not compromise to cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men. I promise you, I will fear God, to whom I will give an account. I will love justice. I will hate bribes, and I will fight for right. Rough.
Amen. Our next speaker is not from the valley, but he's not from the valley, but he is a Montanan, and he is a candidate running in opposition to another Republican legislator who voted against HB 385, and that's Rob Cook. This man is Mark Wicks. He is a candidate for Public Service Commissioner in District 1, again running against a man who voted against HB 385, but even though he's a Republican. Mark is a strong, solid constitutionalist, pro-Second Amendment advocate. He drove all the way to be here. He was at Helena at the gun rally over there a few weeks ago and did a marvelous job. We want him to introduce him to the Flathead Valley. Would you please give a good Flathead welcome to Mark Wicks? Mark, would you come?
It's great to be here. I'd like to point out that Rob Cook actually should be running in your district, but he knew he couldn't get elected here, so he carpet-bagged into mine. But he's pretty well connected, and I can really use your help to help defeat him. My son's back there with some flyers and donation envelopes. I'd sure appreciate it if you gave us a hand. Hunter, he's back there. He's not a talker, so he didn't want to talk tonight. But I'm really, really happy to be here with my fellow caretakers. That's right, I called you caretakers, because you take responsibility for yourself and the people around you to keep them safe. You keep other people safe from violence. The media would have America think that gun owners don't care about anybody except themselves, and that is just not true. Many of us openly cried when we saw the school shooting in Florida. It breaks our hearts. And probably the first thing that went through your mind when you heard about it was, I wish I was there and could have stopped it. That's who we are. We're caretakers. Our most basic human right is the right to self-defense. Our founding fathers understood this because without the right to self-defense, we can't keep anything we have. It can all be taken away in a heartbeat. But I'm not here to talk about the Second Amendment because I believe the right to self-defense transcends the Constitution. It is a God-given right. No government on earth should ever infringe upon our right to defend ourselves. It's not a right that 9 judges on the Supreme Court can take away from us. It is not a right that the Congress can take away from us. It is our fundamental right as human beings to defend ourselves. Nothing I have learned tells me that humanity has changed since the dawn of time. We are still the same people that can commit atrocious acts of violence against fellow human beings. Human history is full of examples of those in power abusing the people they swore to protect. We should not have to make the same mistakes over and over to learn from them. Human nature does not change. People will do bad things. We need to be able to stop them no matter what. I do not feel the need to live through a purge, a genocide, an ethnic cleansing, or any other mass slaughter to understand what the Jews mean when they say, never again. If we are vigilant, it should never happen here. Because we have the right to self-defense, and we have, at the minimum, the ability to stop our government before it gets out of control. That can't be said of an unarmed population. There is a saying that power comes from the barrel of a gun, and that is exactly why some powerful people want to disarm us. You didn't think all those buses and organizing for the anti-gun march on Washington was planned by some teenagers, did you? You can bet it wasn't. There was some pretty powerful figures involved in that. We can resist whatever good intentions they intend to ram down our throats because we're armed. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The Russian and Chinese communist revolutions both started out with good intentions. They wanted to help the peasants, give them better lives. The consequences of those revolutions left the skeletons of 100 million people as the cobblestones on the road to hell. I'm sure that most people supporting gun control have only the best intentions, but we can't forget there are those that will lust for power that an unarmed America offers them. Politicians in states and cities with gun control love gun control. They love the power it gives them. They can grant weapons permits to their friends in exchange for campaign donations. And of course, we can't forget that gun control is only for you and I. It's not for them. They will still have their guns, their children will be protected, and we will be left here at the mercy of 911 operators and overworked police. A lot of our current problems stem from the last time the gun control crowd decided to save the children. The Gun-Free Zone Act of 1990 I don't believe that those that passed it truly had good intentions about that bill. They thought they were going to save the children, but those that really knew what was going to happen, they knew the massacres in the schools would happen because nobody was there to protect them. They had to know that. How naive do you have to be to think that a sign that says gun-free zone protects anyone? No matter what their intentions were, this is the result. Our children are corralled in gun-free zones where monsters can kill them without the fear of anyone acting in self-defense. They have been herded into kill zones for political correctness. The resulting shootings have led us directly to this moment. Now the left has another good idea to fix the last bad idea. And when it doesn't work, they'll have another good idea that won't work. And our rights erode away one by one as they try their naive and foolish fixes. Let us imagine that every firearm in the world magically disappeared. Poof! Would we be safe? Of course not. We only have to look at prison to see how society works without weapons. The strong prey on the weak try to survive at any cost. In fact, if it is absolute safety you crave, I suggest solitary confinement. I think that'd be the safest place. Nobody can get you there. We have to understand that if every firearm was destroyed, the most dangerous weapon in the world that the world has ever seen would still be on every street in America. And do you know what that is? The human mind. There is nothing more dangerous than a human that has decided to kill. They will find a way. Every object can be a weapon. We've seen it over and over. It doesn't matter if they use guns, knives, trucks, cars, bombs. They like acid over in England. Let me tell you about the real consequences of simple-minded solutions to complex problems. My nephew was a vibrant young man, very fit, good-sized kid, worked hard, played hard, but even the strongest man is no match for multiple attackers. My nephew was out riding his bike on a sunny afternoon in Aubrey, Australia. You know, gun-free, safe Australia. As he rode past a park, a group of teens called him names. Now, like most Montana kids, he didn't like that, so he stopped and told him what he thought about being called a name. It was broad daylight in a residential neighborhood, houses up and down the street either side, people out barbecuing, having a good time. He was attacked by those teens, knocked off his bike, and beaten to the ground. There was 8 of them beating on him, girls and boys. Not content to simply teach the Yank a lesson by just knocking him down, one of them got creative pulled his bicycle chain off his bike and whipped him with it. Left him in a comatose and missing his eye. You imagine what it was like for his mother to fly from Montana to see her son in Australia in a coma. He did survive, but it doesn't stop there. He got out of the hospital, recovered, went back to his neighborhood and was walking down the street, and the man started chasing him and screaming at him. Said he was going to kill him. It was the father of one of the children that had beat him up, and the father was mad that he was in jail. All he could do, since he was defenseless, was go home, close the door behind him, and brace him against and hope the door couldn't be kicked in, dial 911, wait for help. The cops did get there in time to save his life, but he'd never been so scared in his life, and he said this would never happen in Montana. We can't let it happen here. This is what life's like in a country where you've lost the right to defend yourself. You have to be scared of everybody. Everybody is a threat. I don't believe anyone should have to endure an assault and hope the attacker has good intentions of only beating you half to death. I don't think my wife and daughters should have to endure a violent rape for any reason. They deserve the right to be able to defend themselves. Living here in Montana, we don't often stop and think about why it is safe to walk down almost any street. And home invasions are almost unheard of. It's because we have guns. We're citizens. We have the right to defend ourselves. We don't let this happen here. And those of people out there that choose not to own firearms, they cash in on the dividends of those of us that do own firearms. Think of your house. You probably locked it when you left today, but locks only keep honest people from being tempted beyond their endurance. If someone wants into your house, they will get in. Owning firearms is the same basic concept. It keeps criminals from being all they can be. But we've read the gun grabber playbook. They will start with our semi-autos, and then our handguns, and then our scoped hunting rifles that somehow magically became sniper rifles. At the end of the gun grabber crusade, we'll be left with some single-shot rifles locked in a safe with our ammunition locked someplace else, but they will still tell us we have our Second Amendment rights because we can still own that pitiful gun. Don't believe them for a second. They're coming for every gun you have, and if they can get that last single shot, they'll go for the knives. That's what they're doing in England right now. But newsflash, we are not going to play their game. We will keep our weapons. Even if you don't want us to, we're keeping them. We need weapons that are the equivalent of the greatest threat we might encounter. That means we will keep our semi-automatics and our pistols and whatever else we need to defend ourselves. We refuse to play your silly games. We will not compromise one more time. They will have to accept that freedom comes with warts and blemishes. We have to ensure that a Holocaust is impossible in this country. We have to learn from history and not repeat it. We need to know this can never happen again. Never again. Thank you. Have a safe trip home.
Our last speaker of the evening is a man that I have known for probably 20 years. In fact, before I moved to Montana, going on 9 years ago now, this was the only Montanan that I knew. And I got to tell you, in all of my years, and all of my travels, and all the people I've met, many great and wonderful men and women that I've had the opportunity to meet and to be associated with and to work with in various causes all over this country, I have never met a finer Christian gentleman and a finer American patriot, a finer lover of liberty, and a finer representative of our great state of Montana than my dear friend, Rick Jor. This man has stood in the halls of the legislature in Helena, and he has faced down any and every unconstitutional proposition that came across his desk. And he did it with grace, but with the fiercest courage that you will ever find in a human being. Rick Jor is a 4-term legislator in the House of Representatives. Rick Jor is, I believe, the only legislator, correct me if I'm wrong, in the state of Montana that has ever won a legislative seat as both a Republican and as a Constitution Party candidate. Rick Jor is not about parties. Rick Jor is about principles. I am honored to be his friend. I am glad to be living in close proximity to this man. I believe this man is what Montana looks like. Rick Jor.
Thank you very much, Chuck. And Chuck is always more kind than he should be to me. I appreciate that. And I have to say, I'm intimidated because so much of what is in my heart and in my guts has been conveyed, and I appreciate that. But I want to just get to my points, and it may be a reiteration of what you've heard, but I think it's important. And I want to first say that my rights do not come from the Constitution. I do not have Second Amendment rights. And I think words are important. And sometimes we get caught up in the box of our statist adversaries who think everything should and does come from government. But like Mark just said, and Seth Bergley said when he quoted Frederick Bastiat, our rights transcend the Constitution because they come from God. They come from the sovereign creator of the universe. And I want to suggest to you that you cannot expect your rights to be secure or unalienable in a secular democracy. And that is what unfortunately, our government has become, and our presuppositions. You ask the average citizen today where their rights come from, they think they come from government. And even amongst our churches, there's this advocacy of secularism that in fact, even though they claim to be religiously neutral, cannot be religiously neutral, and indeed are not, because that's impossible. But I want to reiterate the fact that our rights aren't Second Amendment rights and I know what you mean when you say that, but I catch myself and I try not to say that because we don't want to convey wrong presuppositions when we talk. And it's interesting that, and many people don't know this, but what we call the Bill of Rights had a preamble. Maybe some of you have seen it, maybe some of you haven't. But the Second Amendment, as with all the other Bill of Rights, are not any grant of a right, and they don't even pretend to be in their language. They are strong reiterations of restrictions of authority and power on the federal government. Shall not be infringed is a restriction. Let me read this preamble because it's interesting. I read it on the House floor one time, and many of the representatives were insulted. They thought I was reading something that had no force or credibility. They didn't know what it was. Here's what the preamble to the Bill of Rights when it was submitted to the states for ratification said. December 15, 1791, preamble. Congress of the United States begun and held at the city of New York on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 1789. The conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. Now, I won't read the rest of it, but you see how clear the intent of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments was? Congress shall make no law. That's a restriction. Shall not be infringed, etc. And by the way, one of the points I want to make, and Chuck reminded me of this when talking about President Trump's language about seizing firearms and worrying about due process later. Let me suggest that that's already happening with asset and forfeiture seizures, and has been for years. So in the mind of a statist, where's the barrier between seizing guns? That's the logical transgression. Now, I wanted to go from there to reading a couple sentences out of the Declaration of Independence. We're all familiar with probably the most famous sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. But there's a couple other sentences that I think are vital to understand, and to me they're most important, and one of them has what I view as probably the 4 most significant words in the Declaration, which in my view is the finest document penned by the hand of man, quite frankly. And and don't misunderstand me, I'm not including the scriptures in that, which are God-breathed. I'm talking about man-written documents. But listen to this. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient reasons. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. And here's the sentence I like. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, comma, and the 4 words that I think are the most important, it is their duty to throw off such government. And to provide new guards for their future security. Now, the Declaration does not make sense to a secularist. If you do not view the Declaration with an understanding of the theological foundation, you cannot understand the Declaration. You cannot understand the laws of nature and nature's God. You cannot understand our Creator. You cannot understand the supreme judge of the universe, and you cannot understand divine providence. All terms that refer to God in the Declaration. So if we have obviously, if we have a duty, then there's a higher power. There can be no justification to challenge authority unless there's a higher authority. And if you haven't noticed in history, and I'm being a little bit cynical here, tyrants haven't just given up their powers simply because the subjects requested that they do so. And I think we're kidding ourselves. In fact, this just came into my head. The famous atheist, Bertrand Russell, said that Mahatma Gandhi's efforts would not have been successful. Remember, this was an atheist saying this. Gandhi's efforts of resistance, peaceful resistance, would not have been successful had not the authority that he was resisting been Christianized, which I think is interesting coming from an atheist person. Now, I just want to conclude with this because I think it's important that we be consistent. The Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And that is so logical, I don't know how anybody can miss it. But we don't want to be double-minded. And I want the Second Amendment to be upheld by those who have taken an oath to uphold it and are elected to public office. But in no less fashion, I want the rest of the Constitution to be upheld by those who have taken an oath to uphold it. And I think we've got to be honest enough to ask ourselves if we've been consistent in that advocacy. And I could list a whole long list of areas where the federal government is operating outside of its constitutional boundaries if you understand the Constitution according to what it was intended. And if you don't, then I think you need to read the Federalist Papers, you need to read Madison's notes on the convention and history, because there's no reason why any logical, honest person could come to the conclusion that the Constitution is a living document and the general welfare and the interstate commerce clause means that the federal government can do whatever it decides it wants to do. That is an absurd conclusion, and there are specific arguments against that. But listen, are we being consistent? Do you support? The schools are a sacred cow, you know that. And I hear conservatives talking about more federal money for the schools. We've got a Department of Education that just 20 years ago, maybe 22, the Republican platform called for abolishing to fulfill Reagan's promise. And now we're increasing spending for it. So if you support more spending by the federal government in the arena of education, you're advocating violating the Constitution. And I would say you're... Now I want to touch on this area of mental health because red flags jumped up at me all over when in the 90s, when I was in the late 90s, when I was in the legislature, mental health just became fashionable to include mental health in entitlement program, mental health care. And just this last session, and I was there and I listened to the debate on the Senate floor, there was a bill that passed overwhelmingly that, in the words of the sponsor on the Senate floor, put mental health on parity with physical health. And after these gun shootings, we hear all of this energy advocating for more mental health programs, more mental health money. If you support that, you're advocating violation of the Constitution. And let me say this. It's bad enough that we even get into that box, but my position is, by what authority does the federal government have to even define mental health? And I hope you can see the danger in any government at any level assuming the authority to define mental health, because they define me as mentally ill, believe me. And in fact, that reminds me of a point I don't have written down. I stood on the floor of the House one time. If you're not in the status box, usually you don't fit into the discussion. But I stood and challenged, we were debating a bill to increase spending on an entitlement program from, I think it was 150% to be eligible to 175% of the federal poverty level. And so I stood up and I said, I am offended that the federal government even assumes the authority to define poverty. Where is that in the Constitution and the enumerated powers? But of course, well, I won't even get into that. Now, let me get into one that's kind of hot here, and I may even offend some people. And I never intend to offend people, but sometimes the words offend people, the message, so that's not my intention. But we're dealing in this area, I'm sure it's big like across the state, with this issue of so-called public lands. That's a wrong term. It should be called government land. And if in the name of public access or any other recreation, you support the federal government, the assumption that the federal government legitimately owns all of these national forests, then I would suggest that you're not consistent with the original intent of the Constitution. This is not an issue of public access or hunting rights or even management of those lands. This is an issue of authority. Where in the Constitution, and I cannot come to any conclusion that the founders intended for the federal government to own these vast acreages of land. So we have to be consistent, even if it's controversial. Now, let me really get down to the meat here. We've been violating the Constitution in some areas for so long that we're convinced we just couldn't even live without some of these government programs. Do I say it? Social Security? Friends, I'm going to speak frankly here, and understand me. I'm not saying that you don't have a right to the money that was illegally taken from you all of your life. But there is no and by the way, that program was legitimized by a 5-4 vote of the Supreme Court. Which brings me to my last point. I don't want to go on too long here. Where in the Constitution is there any language that says the judicial branch is has exclusive authority to determine the Constitution? Would you point that out to me? But what's the assumption? And they'll quote Marbury versus Madison, and I've read that, and nowhere in that decision did Marshall even hint that the courts had exclusive authority. If the courts have exclusive authority to determine the Constitution, then logic would tell us that the oath of office of every officer in the other branches is entirely in vain. And this is exactly why we have not seen a check and balance in operating as it should in our Constitution when our court, our Supreme Court, cites international law to uphold, to justify their decisions. And let me just make this point. Most of Congress and most of the media, because they continually put this forth, think that federal judges serve for life. Did you know that's not in the Constitution? Federal judges serve during good behavior. Now, who's supposed to determine good behavior? The Congress, because they have the power of impeachment. And when federal judges cite international laws rather than the U.S. Constitution for their decisions, that's not good behavior. And so don't buy these arguments. Now, I understand that that's the prevalent view, but don't be sucked into it. Maintain consistency, don't be double-minded, and advocate for the Constitution consistently and across the board. We have same-sex marriage. What's the term they throw out? We have Roe versus Wade, basically abortion on demand. We have same-sex marriage because the legislature, the Congress passed such a law, or the legislature in any state? No. So when the media or your neighbors or your elected officials talk about these court rulings being the law of the land, challenge them on that. How can that be? Do you know Article 1, Section 1? And by the way, our founders were not moral relativists. The words that they used meant what they intended them to mean. And the word all, A-L-L, means all. Article 1, Section 1 says all legislative powers herein granted are vested in a Congress of the United States. So if all of the legislative power is vested in Congress, how much is given to the judicial branch? See, we've got to be consistent, folks. So that's the point I wanted to make, and I'm going to close, as I always do, with a quote from our founders, because I find this interesting because of Jefferson's being captured by the secularists of our day, that he is this divine saint of secularism and deism. But here's what he said, and it's right on his memorial in Washington, D.C., as I understand. I hope to see it someday. I haven't seen it yet. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed their only firm foundation, and that is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are a gift from God? Thanks so much, folks. I enjoyed the time. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, Rick. Before I introduce the candidates that are out here in the audience, let me give you one more thought on this mental health thing, please. Once they get their foot in the door on mental health legislation, they can deem anyone to be mentally incompetent at their pleasure. No one is exempt. Let me give you a personal example. After the 2008 presidential campaign, the state of Missouri law enforcement agency issued a report that went to every police officer, sheriff's deputy, city police, state police. Every police officer in the state of Missouri received this report. Came from the Fusion Center, and before that, it was written in the headquarters of the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been feeding propaganda to our law enforcement agencies across the country for years and years and years. The report in Missouri said that anyone who believed in the Constitution, anyone who believed in the second coming of Jesus Christ, anyone who believed in the Second Amendment, anyone who opposed abortion on demand, anybody who opposed the United Nations, and the list went on, was a potential domestic extremist and potential dangerous militia member, and should be carefully watched. The report went on to say that if the officers saw bumper stickers that supported Ron Paul, Bob Barr, or Chuck Baldwin, those drivers must be considered potential domestic terrorists and potential violent extremists. Now, it's one thing for some liberal talk show host on television or some Hollywood radical leftist or some other person in a private capacity accuse us Christians, constitutionalists, Second Amendment advocates, etc., as being crazy and nuts and so forth. But when a police agency of a state officially says that to all of their policemen, ladies and gentlemen, that is a threat and a danger to the liberties of the people. So in the eyes of that state government, anyone who believed in those things or against those things was considered mentally unstable, potentially. Well, Bob and Ron and I found out about that, and radio talk shows around the country began to pick it up, and letters by the thousands poured into the state of Missouri. The three of us got together and drafted a letter demanding a public apology and a retraction by the state of Missouri. They wound up taking that memo down. They wound up eradicating it from their website, and then they conveniently reassigned the individual who created that memo to the officers, and they never did actually apologize to us for what they had done. But what I'm trying to point out, if you think for 1 minute that, oh, well, those are reasonable restrictions on the Second Amendment. I mean, nobody wants a crazy person walking around with a gun. So you think that it's reasonable. Let me tell you something. Once, as Rick said, once you start letting the government define who is and who is not mentally unstable, we are all suspects. We are all in danger, and the liberties and the safeguards and the due process of our liberties are shoveled under the grave, never to be seen again. If we don't stop this right now, I'm talking about 2019 in the legislature, and I hope Seth is right. I hope any kind of this legislation wouldn't see the light of day. But I got to tell you, Seth, I listened to a Republican candidate for Senate here in Montana. I listened to him in an interview, and the interviewer asked him about these mental health laws that are sweeping the country. And this Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate in Montana, instead of talking about this is a threat to our liberties, we must not allow this backdoor gun control to become a reality in our state, he began bragging about his past efforts in mental health legislation. That's a Republican running for U.S. Senate. I'm telling you, when these guys get in front of the cameras and they start talking about this issue, they get mushy real quick, and the politically correct media will come on them, and the culture will come on them, and if we're not careful, they'll start slipping this stuff in and mark it down. Every one of these laws is nothing but backdoor gun control. Montana, we've got to stop it in this state. Listen, anytime anybody around the country talks about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms, every time you hear it mentioned, and I'm talking about across the country, they talk about two states. They talk about Texas and they talk about Montana. Ladies and gentlemen, Montana is a vanguard for the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms for the entire country. I was real proud of the legislature in South Carolina a couple days ago. They went on record publicly and they made a resolution in the legislative body in South Carolina and said, any attempt by the federal government to seize or confiscate the firearms of the people of secession will automatically mandate the secession of South Carolina from the United States. Hoorah! If it comes to that, then so be it. Now, we have several candidates for public office that are here today that were not a part of the platform of the program, but I want them to be introduced because they're probably pro-Second Amendment or they wouldn't be here, my guess. So all of you that are candidates for public office, would you please come right now and just stand in front of me and face the audience, and we want to introduce you to the audience that's here. Just come on in. All you folks that are candidates, come on, don't be shy. No such thing as a shy pilot, all right? Just line up right here. I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us who you are and what is the race that you are in. And if you want to make a quick 30-second promotion of your campaign, by all means do so. Start right here.
All right, can you hear me now? Sid Dowd, running for House District 8 as a Libertarian. My slogan is small government, big deal. And I'll tell you what, I intend to listen in Kalispell and speak in Helena.
Woohoo! Ronald Lee Skis, and I am your candidate for County Commissioner. I have seen one of my opponents putting his signs out saying he is the only conservative in this race. You guys, I'm a Skis. Do I need to explain myself anymore? So in the Flathead, remember, you need 2 skis to get anything done. So skis in the Flathead, and I appreciate your vote on June 5th.
Thank you, Ronald.
Hi everyone, I would love to read a letter that I wrote on my Facebook page, but it's going to be more than 30 seconds. But my name is Keith Stolberg, born and raised here. This is my home. I've been married to my wonderful wife that right over there for almost 27 years now, and we're raising 4 children here in the Valley. I'm a sergeant on patrol at the Sheriff's Department, and I've been working there full-time for over 15 years, and then 2 years previous to that as a volunteer reserve deputy for him. So 17 years of law enforcement experience right here at the Valley. I am the only candidate that can say that all 17 years of my time has been out here on patrol. You'll see me tomorrow night working on shift. And I'm the only candidate that's saying that it is the most important thing that I stay out here as a working sheriff. So I am promising everybody here and from the beginning of my campaign, 10 hours a month minimum of me coming out here, patrolling the streets, along with the men and women of this office. I never want to forget what it's like to be out here doing this job, and I'm going to require everyone in my staff to do the very same thing, because it's very important to stay in touch with the community and also the deputies that you represent. But if you'd like to listen to my letter, I'd be more than happy to read it to you, but my 30 seconds are up.
My name's David Dunn, and I'm running for Montana House District 9. I'm very terrible at public speaking, but I'm a born-again believer in Jesus. I'm very principled on the issues. I go to church with Pastor every Sunday, and iron sharpens iron, and I just like to listen to people that are more intelligent than me, so then I could, you know, be on the right side of the issues, because I feel like my spirit's right. I'm going up against Warren Illey, who is a good friend of Frank Garner in House District 9, so any help I could receive through volunteer hours would be greatly appreciated, and thank you for your time.
My name is Sean Guyman, and since the 90s, I've been fighting against the corruption in the state and in this county, and been standing up and making a difference since Rick Jordan first met me long ago, and many of you others have met me, and I have worked with Jerry O'Neill on many campaigns. God bless you, Jerry. And by the way, I am not going to injure your candidacy in any way, just like all the other times that we have ran together, whether it was for, let's see here, what else have we ran for? Just about everything around, haven't we? Anyways, God bless you all, and I'm so glad you all came. Thank you.
My name is William Manahan, and I intend to be Flathead County's next Justice of the Peace. The right to bear arms is fundamental to a free society. End of story. So I need all of your help, and when I take the oath of office, I will proudly place my hand upon the Bible and swear an oath to protect our constitutional rights, something that I take very seriously, and I wish all of our candidates or all of our judges would. Thank you.
I'm double dipping, and I'm proud to do it because I am excited to be here tonight. Thank you for being here. Our community works when you're connected. Our government works when you're connected. And may we never forget that local government is here to work for you and you not work for us. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
I'm Carl Glim, and I'm the current representative for House District 6 in my 3rd term, so I'm running for my 4th. I'll be termed out. I'm pro-gun, pro-family, pro-life. I have a concealed weapons permit. I'm a life member of the NRA. My dad is a federal firearms license dealer, and he said there's only a choice when you're voting if there's 2 pro-gun candidates. Thank you.
My name is Mark Noland. I'm currently the representative from House District number 10, which is the greater Big Fork area. And I have an opponent in a good libertarian candidate. But I wanted to close a thought of all that needs to happen for evil to succeed is if good men do nothing. Amen. So we all need to do our part and reach out, like I heard from some of the other people here tonight. We need to reach out to our neighbors, having coffee, all the things that we do, and that's how the word's going to get out, that we've got to stand up for our Second Amendment rights and our God-given rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. I don't want to leave tonight without talking about one. You can go back to your seats. Thank you. As I said at the beginning of this rally tonight, Patriots Day, the shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord, the Minutemen, were a pastor and his congregation. We owe the liberties of our country that have been protected in our Constitution and Bill of Rights to the patriot pulpits of America. It was the preachers of colonial America that the Crown referred to as the Black Regiment that were the difference between what America was in 1775 and 1776 and what it is today. The reason we are losing our liberties today, more than any other reason bar none, is because the pastors in our churches of all denominations will not stand up in their pulpits every Sunday and call a spade and teach their people the truth about the liberties they have from God. How many pastors will even mention to their congregations anytime this week about Patriots Day, the shot heard around the world, Jonas Clark, the pastor of the Church of Lexington, and the 8 men that died under the shadow of the church that they worshiped in every Sunday, and the men that risked their lives in order to protect Sam Adams and John Hancock? These were all members of the Church of Lexington, pastored by Jonas Clark. We owe the liberties of our nation, the freedoms of our Constitution, not only to Thomas Jefferson and to George Washington, but to John Leland and Jonas Clark and Peter Muhlenberg and the great preachers of colonial America. And I want to tell you, it's time that people that believed in liberty started supporting pastors that preach liberty and get out of these churches where the pastors will not stand up and preach the liberty of our country. Now, with that as an introduction, how many pastors are in this room tonight? Pastors, let me see, how many pastors are here? There was one here earlier from Big Fork. I shook hands with him before the meeting started. He must have slipped out. Are there any pastors here? Thank you. So Pastor Huff and the pastor that I met from Big Fork and Pastor Baldwin. I'm telling you, you can go across America and try to find preachers that will stand up in their pulpits and preach what the Bible says about liberty, what the Bible says about natural right, what the Bible says about natural law. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our Declaration, as Rick told us, are all predicated on the natural laws of God. Our founding fathers sat at the feet of the patriot pulpits in colonial America for decades, and they learned these principles and they learned these truths. And so when the British were coming on Concord to confiscate the guns in that village, It was the Christian men of Lexington who stood in the shadow of their church house with their musket in their arms and resisted that tyranny and literally started our war for independence. Let me ask you, how many churches would even have any idea, how many congregations would have any idea on what to do when that kind of a situation occurred should it happen today? How many of them are taught anything from the Bible about what the Bible says about God-ordained revolution? There is a difference between just war and unjust war. There is a difference between a holy revolution and an unholy revolution. We fought a holy revolution in 1775 and 1776. The French fought an unholy revolution at about the same time. And God blessed one and God didn't bless another. Ladies and gentlemen, when we fight, when we carry arms, when we take to that moment, whenever we must stand for what is right and what is true and what is free, we had better know why we are doing what we are doing. We better know the reasons behind it. And it's more than just the Constitution. For a Christian especially, it's more than just Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Patrick Henry. It is God Almighty, our Creator, who gave us His laws of which we must obey more than man's. In the Old and New Testaments, we must obey God rather than men. And the founders understood, even those who were not Christians like Jefferson and Franklin and others, understood the natural law principles of liberty that were taught to them, each one of them in the colonial churches of America. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are missing is the patriot pulpit in America today. It's all about fluff and feeling and emotion, feel good, pony show, smoke and mirrors, music, entertainment. Everybody walk out feeling good, and the country is losing its liberties, and the pastors are the ones mostly to blame. The pastors are to blame. But look at the churches that have a pussyfooting, compromising, say nothing, see nothing pastor. They're packed to the gills, huge buildings and auditoriums. Thousands of people flock to their congregations. And look at the pastors in America today that are trying to stand up and tell their people the truth. Little bitty congregation, hardly anybody supporting, very small building, maybe a rented building or a meager building. It's time we need to prioritize what liberty means to us, and that includes our pastors and the men that are leading us spiritually. My heart has been for many years to try and resurrect in America the patriot pulpit and the black regiment preacher in America. And I'm happy to say that we already have over 1,000 pastors in America that have risen to the call. And right now they are happy to identify themselves as a black regiment pastor across America. All denominations. The men and women that you heard tonight have materials, many of them on the tables in the back. We invite you to stick around and to go see the table. I brought on my table several messages that I have brought, including 3 years ago, I read the message of Jonas Clark, word for word, on the first anniversary of the Battle of Lexington. April 19, 1776, he preached a message about the battle. And I preached that word for word. I repeated it word for word. Take that message home. Listen to it, and then let your friends listen to it and say, when's the last time you heard a message like this in your church? I've got a book back there that my son, who's a constitutional attorney, he and I wrote together, To Keep or Not to Keep, Why Christians Should Not Give Up Their Guns. It is a biblical analysis. It's not a political analysis. It's not a constitutional analysis. It takes the Bible Old and New Testaments, and shows conclusively that nowhere does God expect or require that his children surrender their means of self-defense. That we should never, under God, ever surrender our means of self-defense. And I give you the scriptures, both testaments, back in the back. I've got a book on Romans 13, The True Meaning of Submission. Preachers are using this all over the country. Whatever the government says, we got to do. If the government says you can't own guns anymore, as Christians, we must obey the government. Sorry. I've said it all over this country. I'll say it to this crowd tonight. The day that my AR-15 rifle is outlawed, this preacher will be an outlaw. And I believe that I am just in the eyes of God to say that and to mean that. So all this material is back there, and the other fellows have material. And before we go, one last person I want to introduce, and then we'll let you go. Scott Hansen is the general manager of what I think is the best gun shop in the Valley, and that's Frontier Guns and Ammo on East Highway 2 in Evergreen. Scott, would you come and just say whatever you want to say?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chuck, for the opportunity to be here and for the words of freedom. And I look out here, I probably sold half of you people in here a gun already, but and I am pro-gun. But I'd like to invite everybody out to the store, Frontier Guns and Ammo. We're across the street from Nickel Charlie's, in between Big O Tires and Applebee's. But anyway, we can build you an AR right off the wall or sell you one too. But anyway, just like to thank everybody for coming out and supporting freedom. Thank you, Chuck.
And Dr. Annie Bukacek is a Patriot doctor. Dr. Annie, you know, you got to be careful about some of these doctors, folks, because they have become spies for government. Yes. I'm serious. They take personal information, they put it in a form, it goes reported to the federal government. The doctor's profession, like many other professions, is becoming overrun with government overreach and oversight. Dr. Annie Bukacek is an independent doctor. She's holding the line for independent medicine in the Valley, and she's not buckling under the medical system. She chooses to be independent. She fights for her patients, and she is a co-sponsor and, like I said, the instigator of this rally. Dr. Annie Bukacek.
Pastor, thank you so much. So I wanted to say something about mental illness, and that is, I've been a physician for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of people with diagnosed mental illness, different diagnoses given by a psychiatrist. 99.99999% of them would never hurt a fly. Okay, so don't buy into the mental illness, reason for limiting people at all. Don't buy into it. And remember that all of these, autistic or mentally ill people, they're patsies. There's almost always a second shooter. Do you think those people are mentally ill? They're psychopaths, okay? So I just want you to remember that. Don't buy into the mental health illness at all as a reason. None. Most of them are harmless. Most people that documented, diagnosed mental illness are harmless people, some of my favorite people. So the other thing that I wanted to say is we've heard a lot of awesome things today, and we all love our head knowledge, and it kind of puffs us up and makes us feel good. We feel like we're awake or we're smart. And coming to Pastor's Church every Sunday, we get pumped up and excited every week, and he's the best. But if our head knowledge doesn't lead to action, in my opinion, it's worthless. It's not going to do any good. All it does is puff up, make us feel good about ourselves, that kind of thing. We've got to take action. There's going to be legislation coming up, 2019, that people need to sign up. We've got papers at the back at Pastor's table. Julie's holding it up there. If everybody here wrote letters to the legislators, went down to Helena, testified, pro-gun, it could make a big, huge difference. So people have to get active. Thank you, Pastor. Is that good enough?
Thank you, Dr. Annie. Yeah, the purpose of this rally was to educate you and help you to be energized to get involved. in electing the right people to Helena and supporting the right legislation, opposing it, getting involved. By the way, today in my national column, I have a column that I write nationally that goes out all over the country. It's free of charge. If you want to sign up and receive my columns, you can sign up. There's a sign-up sheet back there. And the column that is this week's column, it went out today, is The Shot Heard Round the World and the Man Who Fired It. And it is a history lesson of Jonas Clark in the Church of Lexington and the colonial preachers of 1775 and what brought this country into existence. Free of charge. If you'd like to go by and pick one of those up and take it home and read it or give it to a friend, I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for being here. It was a great turnout. And hey, isn't it great to know? And isn't it great to know? Isn't it great to know that the laws of our state protect our right to carry a firearm in this building? We've been laboring under a delusion for a long time. And it was this rally and Jordan's tenacity and willingness to get to the bottom of it and bring the truth out that brought this to light. And so those of you can tell your friends and neighbors from now on that there is no law prohibiting the carrying of firearms in this fairground building. And again, Jordan, I want to thank you for all the efforts that you made on our behalf. God bless all you folks. I hope that if you don't have to rush out, you'll stay and talk and go by the tables. Thank you for coming. God bless you all.